we have as humanitarians, and if you look at some of the statements that we did and that we put out in the last 3 years, we've said that if impunity prevails, if Israel's impunity continues unchecked, if accountability measures are not actually sought for, if governments that are, supplying arms to Israel, are not upholding international law, not holding Israel accountable for its war crimes and its genocide in Gaza, it will create a precedent and a spillover. And this is what we're seeing. It's a spillover and a precedent of, what worked in Gaza. Why is nobody stopped them in Gaza? Why would they be stopped in Iran and Lebanon?
Thank you for joining me on Keep Talking. I'm looking at the humanitarian crisis as a result of the Israel US war on Iran. Now, this war has exposed the complete breach of international humanitarian law. Civilians are being targeted with impunity. Adults, little school going children, schools, residential buildings, bridges, hospitals, medical facilities, desalination plants, anything that is needed for life is being targeted with impunity in Iran and in Lebanon. Now, none of this is news to Palestinians. They have lived through this in the past 3 years in Gaza. And as this conflict plays out, Gaza is facing severe restrictions in the inflow of humanitarian aid. Nearly 2 million people in this Gaza Strip rely on this aid to survive. On the West Bank, which is the other Palestinian occupied territory, we are seeing an increasing and dramatic surge in targeted violence against Palestinians. To understand what is going on in Gaza and the West Bank as the world focuses on Iran and Lebanon, I'm talking to Bushra Khalidi. She is the policy lead for Oxfam in the West Bank. Bushra, thank you so much for joining me. Can I ask you to describe the humanitarian crisis and how it's just gotten bigger or enlarged since February 28th when this war on Iran started?
It's hard to make direct correlations. I think what I would be saying would be more assumptions and maybe my political opinions. But as Oxfam, first, for one, we don't have an office in Iran, so we don't have operations in Iran. We don't intend to have operations in Iran, so we don't, and we speak from a place of experience, right? So because we have an office in Palestine, we're able to speak on Palestine. It's hard to tell, and have the kind of the granular data that we would have on, on Gaza, that we in Iran. What I do know is that since the war started, my kid is not going to school. None of our kids are going to school all across the Palestinian territory, not just in Gaza. Um, Checkpoints are closed. So, for example, I'm in a city called Ramallah. 20 minutes away, I have a little piece of land, a little farm that we, go and spend weekends on. So, for example, there's a checkpoint between me, where I live, and my farm. I don't know when that checkpoint's open. I don't know when it's closing. I don't know if there's traffic. I don't know how long it's going to take me. It could take me 20 minutes, which is what usually would take me if the roads are open. It could take me 2.5 hours. So that's our life. Our life is dictated by occupation. So sure, they're raining missiles over our heads. We don't have shelters to run to, although the settlements that are just nearby to us do have shelters. Um, so we just, we have to just live with this, and we have to, you know, hope for the best and hope that, there's no debris that's going to fall on our home, or but I wouldn't say that Iran is the biggest of our worries. I would say that Israeli occupation is much more suffocating to the Palestinians than the missiles over our heads right now.
When you read about the kind of targeting of civilian sites, both in Lebanon and Iran, that is taking place at this point, it is something that you all have seen in Gaza. In fact, many observers and many experts are calling it the Gaza playbook, that Israel is doing the systematic, complete destruction that it has already done in Gaza. Are these war crimes? These are, because there is a complete disregard and breach of humanitarian law, isn't it?
I'm not a judge, so I can't speak to specific incidents and determine whether they're war crimes or not. Like, this would need analysis, and we carry out that analysis. So, for example, Oxfam, we carried out analysis on whether on the destruction of or the targeting of water and sanitation facilities in Gaza over the course of the first year and a half of the war. And we found that, in fact, Israel had directly and systematically targeted water and sanitation infrastructure, many of which Oxfam had actually funded. So I wouldn't be surprised that similar tactics are being used in the broader region. We have, as humanitarians, and if you look at some of the statements that we did and that we put out in the last 3 years, we've said that if impunity prevails, if Israel's impunity continues unchecked, if accountability measures are not actually sought for, if governments that are supplying arms to Israel are not upholding international law, not holding Israel accountable for its war crimes and its genocide in Gaza, it will create a precedent and a spillover. And this is what we're seeing. It's a spillover and a precedent of what worked in Gaza. Why is nobody stopped them in Gaza? Why would they be stopped in Iran and Lebanon? So I'm not surprised, and this is something that I hope that we've warned about many times, in fact, that this would happen. Now, whether I can't speak to specific war crimes, but what I can say is that there are laws of war. That we know that in Israel, in Gaza, these laws of war were not respected by both parties, if not just Israel, but also de facto, armed groups, Hamas and others. And war crimes, severe war crimes, and crimes against humanity were committed. And that these parties to the conflict, both Israel and others, should be brought to account. The difference is that Israel is a democratic state that is part of the multilateral forums in the world, whether it's the General Assembly, the UN, and others. And so third states have an obligation to hold Israel accountable and to hold any other state accountable for war crimes. But particularly when you have all of the experts, all of the most renowned genocide scholars, including Israeli genocide scholars, when you have Amnesty and you have Human Rights Watch and you have Médecins Sans Frontières and you have all of these academics saying that there's a genocide in Gaza. And then you have the International Court of Justice that South Africa, litigates a case that there's a potential plausible risk of genocide in Gaza. And that gets accepted by the court. It means that something really, really bad is happening in Gaza. You want to call it genocide, you want to call it a war crime, you want to call it crime against humanity. Something terrible happened in Gaza. And from my perspective, when you have a little child who, does something bad, you punish the child so that they learn to not, and to not do that again, to not repeat that same mistake, because there are consequences to your actions. There have been no consequences to Israel. So now we're seeing what we're seeing in Lebanon and Iran, and we should not be surprised.
We are seeing the statements that the UN Secretary General has made, statements that the Commissioner General of the UNRWA have made. They're all calling this out, and yet the you know nations are not able to act in order to prevent what happened in Gaza, and now, as you say, what we are seeing play out in Iran and in Lebanon. uh, what does one look at for recourse at this point of time, as someone who is a humanitarian, who works with a humanitarian agency, and who's seen what humanitarian laws expect people to do?
First of all, international law doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't just operate on its own. It's not a machine that just runs itself if you oil it. It's a tool, right? So it's like if you want to hang a hammer and you just have hang a frame and you just have a hammer and you don't have the nail, you're not going to be able to so it's a tool out of many other tools in the toolbox. Um, there has been a massive failure by states here. This is not about states unable to, it's states unwilling to, collectively, to prevent the violence in Gaza and now to prevent the regional spillover into Lebanon, Iran, and beyond. We've heard the warnings, we've heard the statements of condemnation, we've heard them in Gaza for the last 3 years. But statements of condemnation don't stop genocide. They don't stop from little children being killed. Sorry. So yeah, now many governments are publicly warning about this regional escalation, but in reality, they have not been willing to prevent the dynamics that has allowed the devastation in Gaza to unfold and then expand across the region. After more than 3 years of war in Gaza, the total abject failure to enforce meaningful accountability or hold any violations has contributed to this wider normalization of escalation. And the result is that similar patterns, like you mentioned, of large scale military action, of forcible displacement, of collapse of the humanitarian sector are now playing out in Lebanon and Iran. I mean, in Lebanon, alone, already recent fightings has already killed hundreds and displaced more than, I don't know, remember the name. Is it almost a million?
About half a million, half a million
800,000,
I'm
I was going to
reading,
say.
and about 900 killed in
Exactly.
Lebanon.
Exactly. So, and at the same time, the direct strikes between Israel and Iran, including attacks on critical infrastructure, are of course raising fears of a much more broader regional war with severe global economic and humanitarian impact. And we have openly warned that this would happen. We have openly warned before even the attacks and the strikes on Lebanon that Lebanon could become the next Gaza, because aid access is becoming increasingly dangerous and civilian suffering is deepening. So, despite, of course, diplomatic statements and, calls for restraint, that's not going to be good enough, because this has revealed a deeper structural problem, where states are, very well able. They do great. They actually write great statements and they write great condemnations and they issue really important warnings, but they have not been. They have. My sense is that they have been unwilling to translate this into preventative action, whether it's through enforcing a ceasefire, whether it's through restricting the sale of arms, whether it's through real political pressure that is capable of changing military behavior.
Yeah.
And the consequences is that violence is not contained. It travels geographically, politically, and normatively from one arena to another. And that is what we're seeing before our eyes.
Bushra, you talked about genocide in Gaza. We know that, famine was declared last year in Gaza, officially, unofficially. I mean, this is a complete destruction of human life that we have seen and that has been documented. Since the ceasefire was brokered in October last year by the US, were things any better? And now with February 28th, and the closing of those crossings again, how, give us what has happened between the ceasefire and now.
The short answer is that no, the situation is not meaningfully better today in March 2026. Sure, some of the dynamics have shifted since the ceasefire arrangements were brokered, but the structural humanitarian catastrophe, the risk of mass starvation, the destruction of civilian life and infrastructure, of course, remains extremely severe. The ceasefire has not translated into sustained protection for civilians or meaningful humanitarian recovery in Gaza. Like I said, large parts of Gaza remain, physically devastated. We have entire neighborhoods destroyed. We have essential infrastructure that has completely collapsed, and we have the majority of the population that is still displaced. Um, Health services, water system, electricity networks, food supply chains, those have not been restored at scale. We're not seeing, farming in Gaza. We're not seeing the industries revive, not at all. And the risk of famine, which, like you said, international assessments, warned about the risk and famine happening in 2024 and then later in 2025, has not been fully reversed. Actually, food access remains highly constrained because of the restrictions that remain on international organizations, due to the insecurity in Gaza, because, of course, there's no law and order. So it's complete chaos. There has been a complete breakdown of the local markets and agricultural production. So many families in Gaza continue to rely entirely on humanitarian assistance to survive. And also the ceasefire did not resolve the core drivers of the crisis, and we knew this in the ceasefire deal itself. I mean, we did not think this was a ceasefire deal that was going to be to the benefit of the Palestinians, because restrictions on movements on people and goods remain, the limitation on the humanitarian access and recovery and reconstruction materials remain. There's a complete collapse of governance and service systems. Nothing has been done to meaningfully restore those. There are ongoing military operations and airstrikes almost daily in Gaza, and international actors remain unable to predict a large scale recovery mechanism for Gaza. So as a result, with the intensity of the bombardment that may have fluctuated, sure, at different moments, the conditions for Palestinians in Gaza remains absolutely catastrophic.
Let's shift to the West Bank, which is where you are. You said you're in Ramallah. And we have been seeing in the past year, I mean, this has been going on for a very long time, what is called settler violence. But in the past year, we have seen a lot of videos emerge documenting the kind of violence that Palestinians in these lands are facing. And, just as we speak, we've had this recent, there are many cases, but we've just had this awful case of the family where four people, which were parents and two little children, out of two little children and a family of four,
Yeah,
were killed, and two children have survived that killing, and that was by the Israeli security
yeah.
forces. So tell us what is happening in the West Bank and this settler violence and this very targeted violence that the Israeli security forces are not just enabling but are actually directly conducting themselves.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I mean, like, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay,
Um,
Bushra. We just want to listen.
yeah, of course. That story yesterday when I woke up, really, it really moved me. And I'm sure moved the world. To have a child explain what happened. And he says, in his interview, he says, I asked the soldiers, do you have parents? And the soldiers ask him, say, yeah. And he says, do you love your parents? And the soldier answers, yeah. And he says, well, why did you kill mine? You know, the innocence of a child, just like, like to ask such questions. I mean, I have a 7-year-old son, and he's scared of the settlers. And we live in a rather, I mean, I would say, we're not in a village that's next to settlements next to us. We're in the city center. So there's that kind of protection. So we see the army, but settlers don't necessarily come in the city center. But on our farm, it's right next to a settlement. So when my son says, I'm scared that the settlers are going to come and take my house, I mean, what are mothers in Palestine supposed to tell their children? Like this family was going, like, it's Ramadan, they're probably going to visit family somewhere. They're in Nablus, maybe shopping and buying the clothes for Ramadan and buying all of the food for Eid that is tomorrow. And you're going with your whole family, and the Israelis just shoot out the entire car. I think it's something like 70 bullets that were fired on the car, and these two little boys survive. And they see their mom die in front of them and take her last breath, and I worry about that. I like, what does that do to what is this son, how is he going to grow up? I mean, wouldn't you grow up with so much anger inside of you? So much bitterness and hatefulness and rage? I mean, I'm enraged just at the story in itself. I cannot even imagine happening to me. So, yeah, global attention has been, of course, focused on Gaza, and now this regional escalation with Iran. But the situation in the West Bank has deteriorated absolutely sharply. And the problem is that you have these incidents, right? So we're looking at them as isolated events, but they're not isolated events. They're part of the same system. They're part of the same part and parcel of the same Israeli government. And like you said, I mean, the increase in settler attacks. It's abominable. It's horrific that this is happening in 2026. That you've got mobs of settlers organized, protected by the army, literally in semi-uniform, basically, like i.e. semi-military uniform and civilian clothing, going to villages to kill people. That is what they're doing. We're hearing, I mean, we're talking about, in the last 3 years, a record number of home demolitions, record number of forcible displacement in the West Bank, record number of settler violence attack, record number of Palestinians killed in with total impunity by Israeli forces, record number of Palestinians arrested arbitrarily by Israeli forces with no legal due process. So just record numbers we've never seen before. And this is creating facts on the ground that are amounting to gradual forced displacement. Okay, so maybe these people are still in their homes for now, but eventually these people will have to leave because Israel and the settlement kind of organized crime are creating such a coercive environment that people are unable to stay on their lands anymore, and this is by design. And then, of course, the at the same time, Israeli military raids and the use of live fire has is just being used. I mean, with full impunity across towns and refugee camps. And like you said, this is one of the most shocking recent cases where you've got two children that are surviving with injuries, and watching both of their parents and their siblings, come under fire, under Israeli fire. Um,
Bushra, what is the end game for Israel in what it is doing right now with the settlements and the settler violence in West
you
Bank?
have
There is a political end game here, isn't it?
It's
That they're
it's I mean, Israel has said it, it's not even me. I mean, Israeli officials are always saying it. We just don't want to take sometimes we're giving it benefit of the doubt. We understand that Israel also has, a judiciary system and has a bureaucratic system that, think these decisions don't are just not made. There's a parliament, there's a government. So but the Israelis have said it. It's called annexation. It's called the Greater Israel Plan. It's called full annexation of Area C. It's basically a bigger Israel with less Palestinians on it. And that has always been the policy. That's been the policy since '67. Um,
and this would also mean that this Palestinian state, the two nation theory, the
there's
Palestinian
no
nation and a
Palestinian state
Palestinian
yet,
state
but
would physically be impossible to create
there
even
is
going
no
forward, isn't it?
absolutely. I mean, listen, I mean, how do I explain it? It's if you look at a map, no city or Palestinian town is actually connected to each other. There's a settlement in between every single town and city and village, so there's no territorial continuity. It's not like you enter one territory and that all of that is Palestine. No, you drive for 2 kilometers, there's a settlement. You drive for another 2 kilometers, there's a settlement. That settlement is under a different legal jurisdiction. We live under military occupation and martial law, so Israeli military law, and the settlement
So there are two laws. There are two laws
is not laws for
in the
Palestine.
West Bank, one
The
for you and
settlement
one
that's
for
right
Israel.
next to me is under Israeli civil law. So there are two laws that govern, so there's no state, there's no Palestinian state. And sorry, but a two-state solution would require almost 1 million settlers evacuating. Where are they going to go? So, we're Oxfam. At Oxfam, that's not, it's not our decision. We provide humanitarian assistance. We provide, but of course, I'm Palestinian. I live this reality every day. What Palestinian state are you talking to us about? I mean, we're all happy that the French and the Saudis have, taken forward the New York State Declaration last year and committed to a pathway to a two-state solution. But what two-state solution are you talking about? I have no territory. I can't even get to my farm that is a 15-minute drive away from me because of checkpoints and settlements. So they have fragmented and completely isolated all of the different communities in the West Bank so that there's no territorial and also cultural, continuity. So the plan has been said. They've said it. The Israelis have said it for a very long time. It's from their perspective, they see the West Bank as Judea and Samaria. In Judea, Samaria, i.e., said Israel. That's the plan. It's how fast are they going to be able to implement it? That's the question.
Palestine is also actually at the heart of Israel's conflict with Iran. We saw Al-Quds Day being, that Iran celebrates during the month of Ramzan every year, and we saw, this is Palestine is the heart of this current war as well, isn't it?
I mean, it's hard to hear where, I mean, again, Oxfam, is potentially not exactly the organization that can speak pertinently to this. But yes, in political, symbolic, and maybe strategic terms, Gaza and Palestine are definitely deeply central to the current regional tensions involving them. Because Palestine, of course, is a core political symbol in Iran's, regional narrative. Gaza, of course, helped trigger the current cycle of regional escalation, and has been, of course, a major turning point in reshaping a lot of regional alignments. Um, but Gaza did not cause the Iran-Israel conflict, but definitely maybe intensified it and accelerated it. And now the region is experiencing this wider war dynamic. But our lives in Palestine remains deeply affected by the insecurity, but by forcible displacement, by the economic collapse. And it's funny that you mentioned Al-Quds Day. Palestinians were not able to even celebrate Al-Quds Day because Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem has been off limits to Palestinians entire Ramadan. And it's my first Ramadan that I don't get to go to Al-Aqsa, and it makes me emotional because, like that's our tradition, and we go to Laylat al-Qadr and we pray and we have dinner together, and it's a vivid childhood memory for many Palestinians. For those that have the chance to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque and pray. None of us have been able to do that during this Ramadan, and that is very, very, nobody has said anything because, of course, the world is on fire and there are much more important issues happening in Lebanon and Gaza, but it's telling of the times. So Gaza is not the only obviously cause of the Iran conflict, but it has become
No,
its
of course. I didn't mean it was. I'm
emotional
saying it is at the heart.
center. No, I would say that I would argue that Gaza has become the emotional and political and strategic center. Because Palestine has been a powerful mobilizing issue, not just for Iranians in the region, for the world.
True. I was going to ask you that here we are in the month of Ramzan. We say Ramzan, you're saying Ramadan. In India, we say Ramzan. And it is Eid this week as we record. What is it like to fast? What must it be like to fast in Gaza when there is no food? What is it like? I mean, you've already described what it means emotionally to you at this point of time, but I can't help but wonder, what is a celebration of Eid? What is the observance of this holy month of fasting, which is to commemorate the revelation of the Quran, at this time? I mean, it's mind boggling. I'm sitting in Mumbai, safe, and watching all of this, and it's intolerable.
It is intolerable.
Uh, you know
I mean, I have to say that I have been entirely so inspired by the faith that the Gazans have shown. And it's actually brought me closer to my faith, in the last 3 years to see the level of belief in God, and giving them strength in the most horrific at times. It's definitely inspired me to get closer to my faith, and of course, Ramadan is a time of patience, of generosity, of family, of shared meal. It's a time when our communities, they come together, every evening to break the fast. When the streets are full, when the homes are warm, when the mosques are alive with prayer. um but yeah, I guess in Gaza, fasting sometimes it never really ends, because families are already skipping meals, and so that their children can eat. And some people, break their fast with little more than bread, canned food. Um, but even, for example, water, even clean water in Gaza is difficult to access. So the spiritual meaning of fasting, which is meant to be voluntary and meaningful and shared, has been almost replaced by something so much harsher, which is like forced hunger. But and at the same time, like, the destruction of entire neighborhoods means that also the social fabric of Ramadan has also been torn apart, because the families are displaced, they're living in overcrowded shelters or makeshift tents, extended families, we'd normally gather around one table. They're now separated. I know this because my husband's family is in Gaza, so my in-laws are all in Gaza. So, it's the third Ramadan now. And now, Eid is tomorrow, and it's supposed to be a celebration of joy, of renewal, of hope after a month of sacrifice. Children are excited to wear new clothes and to visit their relatives and to receive, gifts and sweets. And but many children in Gaza today, I'm sorry, I'm just like a mess, but have no homes to return to. They don't have safe streets to play in. They have very little to celebrate. And I know my sister-in-law tries in the most extraordinary ways to create moments of normalcy for our nephews. So we did a drive to distribute toys made from like recycled materials that she did, or like families sharing, the smallest kind of portions of food. But of course, beneath that resilience is just immense exhaustion and trauma. And this moment, for organizations like ours, is just a painful reminder that, while faith and community are incredibly strong, no population in the world should be left to endure, prolonged hunger or displacement or fear. So each year, in Gaza, it's a call to the world to restore dignity, and to ensure that everybody has the right to eat and the right to live and the right to breathe and the right to assistance. Um,
And this is about an existential survival, right? At this point of time, I can't even begin to imagine the the emotional trauma. I mean, I can sense some of it that you're feeling, and people in Gaza, the emotional trauma, the mental health issues, the future that you're looking at, what is happening to the education of children, what are they growing up with, what are the skills they have. I mean, the focus is on existence, on survival, on making it, but there is so much beyond that's going on, and the dehumanization, I think, that we see, in the way the Israelis talk, Israeli leaders, the way Americans have started talking about a lot of people that they are fighting with or fighting against, this dehumanization. What is the kind of impact that's having on people?
well, I guess we feel like we don't exist, we don't matter. We are just numbers, we're just statistics, and we are, it's Palestinians have always been at war, whatever. This has been the entire story. Like um what it feels like, at least from a Palestinian perspective. So for me, the dehumanization has been pretty appalling, especially for somebody like me who's done a lot of speaking out and speaking to media. I've been a target of that kind of dehumanization and that kind of generalization that Palestinians are all violent inherently and we're all pro Hamas inherently. But I agree. One of the most devastating consequences of this war has been the progressive dehumanization of Palestinian, where we're no longer seen as individual with rights, with dignity, with families, with aspirations, with dreams, but we're become numbers or threats or just collateral damage, and it's had a really dangerous effect because when people are dehumanized, it just becomes easier basically to justify extreme levels of violence. We've seen babies rot in incubators in Gaza. Yeah, we've seen an elderly woman with a white flag, being sniped. We've seen a child burn in a tent. So like it becomes easier to accept this. It becomes easier to accept mass displacement. It becomes easier to accept famine. It becomes easy to accept, the destruction of every single hospital in Gaza and every single school in Gaza. That becomes acceptable. That's what dehumanization does, because the human reality behind this losses is just never fully acknowledged by any of the mainstream media, and it shapes how the world responds. And we've seen moments where the suffering of civilians is debated, as if it were this abstract political issue, rather than an emergency that's affecting millions of actual lives of souls. So and the impact is not only immediate, by the way, it's going to be long term and generational, because children growing up in this environment, they internalize fear, they internalize loss, they internalize humiliation. And so, and families that are experiencing like repeated displacement and uncertainty, it means that social trust also erodes, and communities lose not only their infrastructure but also their sense of safety and belonging. And dehumanization has been also the cause of what you were talking about, the undermining of international norms, because when the protection of civilians is applied selectively, it weakens the credibility of the entire global system that was meant to prevent exactly these kind of tragedies that we saw in Gaza. And so yeah, for me, despite this, what we continue to see though in Gaza is extraordinary resilience. People are still sharing what little they have. People are still trying to protect their children's sense of normalcies, and communities are still finding to ways to support one another. So we have to be able to recognize this humanity, so that we can restore the conditions where it can flourish, because it's essential not only for Gaza but for the credibility of values everywhere in the world.
Bushra, there's thank you, I think, for sharing things so candidly. I'm sorry that we I made you emotional with this conversation, but I think people need to hear, people need to see, and if we can document, that's I mean, look at how I'm clutching at straws. All I'm offering is to be able to document, right? Let I think maybe you could leave us with what Oxfam is looking for. I can see a call for donations. I can see basic basic hygiene kits, food, shelter, water, having to go to Lebanon, having to go to Gaza, of course. What does one need from a humanitarian aid point of view?
Please, support Oxfam, support organizations like Oxfam, providing, the basic needs to communities, but not just the basic needs. We also work with municipalities at real big infrastructure development projects in the private sector. So, our work is really rich and cross-sectoral. I also think like people, regular people, beyond donations, we need people to continue the calls for accountability. Keep Palestine at the center of this, because like you said, I think Palestine, Gaza is so much of the center of everything that's happening in the region. I think like people need to call out this impunity, Israel's full impunity, where it can basically do whatever it wants, and it can attack any country it wants at any time it wants, and nobody's going to do anything. I mean, that is not the world that we want to live in. Whether it's Israel or any other country, no state should be able to do this. We need the upholding of international law, and we as citizens, regular citizens, we have power. If we come together, and we saw things did shift. We 3 years ago people didn't know about Palestine. Now there's nobody in the world that doesn't know about Palestine, and that's huge. And we need to continue that work. And we need to say no. This is not the world that we want to raise our children in. Beyond Palestine and Gaza, we don't want to see babies die anymore. That's what we're tired of. And our lives are not meaningless. We're not just numbers. We have hopes, we have dreams, we live like the West. So I think like there's also a call to Western, population to not enable this. The weapons that were used in Gaza are paid for by European and American taxpayers' money. And people need to understand that. So this has a direct link to your heating, back in the UK or in France. You are enabling this with your own taxpaying money. You should be, inquiring whether your organization is supporting, for example, companies that are expanding settlements in the West Bank. You should be inquiring whether your, insurance policies are contributing to big arms companies. These are things that we as individual citizens can do, and we should be holding our own and respective elected officials accountable. That is another thing that, in democracies at least, that we can do, and keep on marching, keep on speaking out, and keep on telling these stories. And I'm really happy that you brought up the story of this woman. Talk about those stories, because these children have names, and they have lives, and they have stories, and they deserve to.
The O'Day family, isn't it? The O'Day
Holy
family.
family, yeah.
Bushra, thank you for making time. I wish you a good
Thank
Eid.
you so much.
Um, and we'll keep talking. That's the least we can do, the very, very least we can do. So we'll keep talking. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.